The radio crackled once, then went silent. Ramzan Kadyrov pressed his thumb against the transmission button and smiled, not the smile of a soldier, but the smile of a man who had already decided how many Americans would die today. He counted his mercenaries in the darkness of the North Ridge. 43 men, mortars staged, firing coordinates locked. He had done this before in Grozny and Aleppo, in places where no one came home to file reports. FOB Sentinel was just another name on a list he intended to finish by nightfall. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel right now and follow every part until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The drive into FOB Sentinel took Alyssa Carter past 3 miles of switchback mountain road that most people would find beautiful. She did not find it beautiful. She found it tactically compromised, a single lane carved into limestone, with drop-offs on the western side and dense tree cover pushing within 40 feet of the shoulder on the east. If she had been planning an ambush, she would have used this road. She would have placed 2 shooters in the tree line at the second bend and a command-detonated charge under the gravel at the blind curve just before the guard post. She would have waited until the vehicle slowed for the turn. She pressed the accelerator instead and told herself to stop thinking that way. That was the agreement she had made with herself 5 years ago, and she had kept it mostly intact. Mostly. The base materialized through her windshield in the way that military installations always do, gradually without announcement, the civilian world simply ending and the military world beginning in its place. Chain link fencing, concrete barriers staggered in offset rows, a guard post with a young specialist who looked like he graduated high school the previous spring. He checked her ID with the focused attention of someone performing a task he had been trained for, but had never once needed to take seriously. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "Captain Carter's expecting you. Welcome to Sentinel." She smiled at him the way she had learned to smile, warm, uncomplicated, the smile of a woman who spent her days behind a camera lens chasing elk migrations across mountain terrain. She had practiced that smile in the mirror more times than she wanted to admit. "Thank you," she said. "I always forget how cold it gets up here." He waved her through. The first thing she did before she looked for Daniel, before she unloaded her gear, before she did anything that a wife visiting her husband's base would reasonably do, was drive slowly around the interior perimeter and look at everything. She told herself she was just orienting, getting a feel for the layout before she started photographing. It was a reasonable thing for a photographer to do. She told herself that right up until she caught herself calculating fields of fire from the South Ridge. FOB Sentinel was smaller than its designation suggested. It housed just under 200 personnel, a combination of active army, a small signals intelligence unit, and a rotating detachment from an intelligence support activity she wasn't supposed to know existed, but did. The base sat at an elevation of 6,200 feet in the Bitterroot Range of western Montana, positioned there because of its proximity to a series of communication relay towers that monitored cross-border signal traffic from 3 provinces of western Canada that nobody talked about publicly. Daniel had explained the official version when he took command 8 months ago. Signals monitoring, equipment maintenance, routine rotation. He had been proud of the assignment in the careful way that career officers learn to be proud without revealing what actually matters to them. She had listened and nodded and taken photographs of the mountains. She found him in the operations center, which was a generous name for what was essentially a prefabricated building with enough computing equipment to overheat in summer and freeze solid in winter. He was reviewing a logistics report with a young sergeant who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. When Daniel saw her through the window, something changed in his face. The officer posture stayed exactly where it was, but underneath it, something loosened. And she loved him specifically for that, for the fact that after 7 years of marriage, he still had a face that changed when he saw her walk into a room. He excused himself from the sergeant and crossed to her, and when he put his arms around her, she let herself be held for a moment and tried not to think about the sensor array she had noticed on the north perimeter that should have been sweeping at a 15-degree arc and was instead sitting fixed at 11 degrees, which meant there was a dead zone along the ridgeline of approximately 60 meters. "You made good time," he said into her hair. "Roads were clear. I stopped in Missoula for coffee." He pulled back and looked at her with the expression he had been using for 7 years, whenever he suspected she was not telling him everything, which was accurate roughly 70% of the time. "You look tired." "I drove 4 hours through mountains." "That's not what I mean." She picked up her camera bag from the floor and slung it over her shoulder. Show me where I'm staying. I want to get set up before the light changes. He studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he let it go, which was also something she loved him for, and also something that sometimes broke her heart. She spent the first afternoon doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She photographed the base not for any surveillance purpose, purely out of the habitual discipline of a woman who had trained herself to always maintain her cover, even when there was no longer any cover to maintain. She got good shots of the motor pool in afternoon light. She photographed two soldiers playing cards on an equipment crate. She found an extraordinary image of the communications antenna against a bruised winter sky and spent 20 minutes on it. And while she did all of that, she mapped the base in the part of her mind that had never actually switched off. Northridge elevated terrain, approximately 800 to 900 meters from the perimeter wire, heavy tree cover with clear sight lines to the operations center, the motor pool, and the fuel depot. The fuel depot was the problem. The fuel depot was always the problem at installations like this. It sat close enough to the main compound that a single well-placed round would create a secondary explosion that would kill people in the surrounding structures. She noted the positions of the quick reaction force barracks. She noted the two gaps in the perimeter fencing where the terrain made vehicle barriers impractical. She noted the communication dead zones based on where she lost her cell signal and where she regained it. She told herself she was just a photographer orienting herself to an interesting location. By evening, she had stopped telling herself anything. Daniel found her at dinner in the small mess facility, sitting with a cup of coffee and a plate of food she hadn't touched. He set his tray down across from her and sat and looked at her the way he had been looking at her all day, with the patient, careful attention of a man who had learned that the worst thing he could do was push. "You're mapping the base," he said. She looked up. "Not in a bad way," he said quickly. "I just know how you look when you're processing terrain. You get this thing with your eyes. I'm a photographer. I'm always processing terrain." "Liz," she set down her coffee. "The north perimeter sensor array is fixed at 11 degrees instead of 15. There's a 60-meter dead zone on the ridge." The shift in his face was immediate and subtle, and spoke to 7 years of a marriage that had taught him never to entirely dismiss what she noticed. "That's a maintenance issue. It's been logged." "When was it logged?" 6 days ago. "And it's still sitting at 11 degrees. It's on the maintenance schedule for next week." "Alyssa, the gap in the southwest fence line, the terrain dip between barriers C7, 8, and C9. How wide is it?" 4 meters. We have a roving patrol covering it." "How often does the patrol pass that point?" He was quiet for a moment. "Every 40 minutes. She did not say what she was thinking. She picked up her fork and made herself eat a bite of food she could not taste. "You're doing it again," Daniel said quietly. "I'm having dinner." "You're calculating something. You've been calculating something since you got here." She set the fork down. She looked at him across the table, at the face she had chosen, the life she had chosen, the woman she had decided to be, and she wanted very badly to say nothing and let it go. She was good at that. She had been good at that for 5 years. "The base feels wrong," she said. He was quiet for a long time. "Wrong how?" "I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." He looked at her steadily. She could see him working through the geometry of what she had just said, and what it implied, and what it meant about the woman he had married, and the things she had not told him. She could see him deciding, as he had decided a dozen times before, to trust her over his own instincts. "I'll talk to the security officer in the morning," he said finally. "Tonight," she said. "Talk to him tonight." He studied her. "Okay," he said. "Tonight." She picked up her fork again. She ate. Outside the mess facility, the Montana wind moved through the ridgeline pines with a sound that was very close to silence. She had learned in a different life in a different country that silence was not the same as safety. She had learned it in Helmand Province on a morning when everything had felt exactly this quiet right before it stopped being quiet at all. She was 17 minutes into her second cup of coffee when she saw him. He was crossing the mess facility with the unhurried walk of someone who had spent so many decades inside military installations that the environment had simply become a layer of skin. He was perhaps 65, built the way men get built when they have spent a lifetime at the physical edge of what the human body can sustain, not large, but dense in the specific way of someone whose physical capability had long since been transferred from the muscles to the mind. He had the eyes of a man who processed everything and showed nothing. He saw her at exactly the same moment she saw him, and he stopped walking. Not because he was surprised, because he was confirming something. His name was Marcus Hale. She had not seen him in 6 years. She had hoped, in the way that people hope for things they cannot control, that she would not see him again. He crossed the mess facility and sat down across from her without being invited, which was something Marcus Hale had always done because Marcus Hale had never in his life waited for permission to go where he needed to go. "You got old?" she said. "You got careful," he said. He glanced at her camera bag. "How's the photography?" "You know what I do. I know what you tell people you do." He poured himself coffee from the carafe on the table. "I also know what you were doing this afternoon, walking the perimeter with that camera around your neck and your eyes on the ridgeline. I was looking for a good shot. You were establishing fields of fire from the South Ridge." He said it without inflection, the way a man states weather. "You counted the gap intervals in the perimeter fence. You noted the sensor dead zone." He set down his cup. "Welcome back, Phantom." The word hit her like a physical thing. She had not heard it in 5 years. She had been careful about that. She had been so careful. "Don't call me that," she said. "Okay." He didn't look sorry. "How long have you known something is wrong?" She looked at him across the table. Marcus Hale had trained more than 300 scout snipers over a 22-year career that had taken him to places that did not appear on deployment records. He had taught her to read terrain the way a musician reads music, not as a series of notes, but as a living structure with intention and momentum. He had also taught her things about herself that she had spent 5 years trying to forget. She trusted him the way you trust someone who has seen you at your worst and did not look away. "Since I came through the gate," she said. He nodded, unsurprised. "I've been picking up fragment intercepts for 3 days. I didn't have enough to push up the chain. Still don't." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "But this came in an hour ago." She unfolded the paper. It was a partial SIGINT transcript radio intercept, partially decoded, partially still in the original language. She read it twice. She read it a third time. "Tomorrow, 1340 local. Northridge approach. Package confirmed." "Package confirmed," she said. "Language pattern matches Chechen mercenary communication structure. Specifically a group that operated in Syria between 2019 and 2022, before transitioning to contracted operations in Eastern Europe." He paused. "And one deployment we know about in Alaska in 2023 that officially never happened." She refolded the paper and slid it back. "Who else has seen this, you and me?" "Marcus, I know. You have to take this to command." With what a fragment intercept that translates to 4 words and a timestamp, the base commander is going to ask me for corroborating intelligence, and I don't have any. What I have is a piece of radio traffic and a woman sitting across from me who has been reading this installation's vulnerabilities since she drove through the gate. He leaned forward slightly. "You felt it before you saw this paper. Tell me what you felt." She was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the mess facility hummed with the ordinary sounds of evening trays clattering a television in the corner, showing a basketball game, 2 soldiers arguing about something that didn't matter. "It's set up to be hit," she said quietly. "The sensor gap, the southwest fence, the patrol interval. They're not random maintenance failures. They're a pattern. If I were going to bring a coordinated assault into this installation from the north and exit through the southwest, I would need exactly those 3 conditions to exist simultaneously." She paused. "And they do." Hale was quiet. "The fuel depot is an anchor point," she continued. "You take that out in the first 90 seconds, you've got secondary explosions and fire suppression systems activating, which pulls every first responder on the base toward the north perimeter. That's when you bring your main force through the southwest gap. The QRF barracks are 200 meters from the gap. If the QRF is dealing with fire at the depot and incoming from the north, they never properly consolidate." She stopped herself. She hadn't meant to get that far into it. The analysis had simply arrived in her mind, fully formed the way it always had, the way she had never been able to stop it from doing. Hale was looking at her with an expression she recognized. It was the expression he had used in training when a student exceeded what he had expected. "You never stopped," he said. "I stopped." "You never stopped." She stood up and picked up her camera bag. I'm going to talk to Daniel. And tell him what—" She paused. "Tell him you have a bad feeling," Hale said, not unkindly. "Tell him a retired training officer showed you a forward intercept, and you've been quietly mapping his base's defensive vulnerabilities since you arrived." How does that conversation go, Alyssa? She stood there with the camera bag over her shoulder in the buzzing ordinary light of the mess facility, and she understood the problem precisely. There was no conversation that told Daniel what needed to be told without telling him everything. Without telling him about Hellman, about the 89 confirmed kills in the official record, and the 3 that never made it into any record at all. About the woman who had existed before Alyssa Carter, the woman who had called herself nothing and gone by a call sign that meant she was already a ghost. "We have until tomorrow at 13:40, she said. "Yes." "And we have tonight." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the Montana wind pushed at the walls of the building with a patient, persistent force. "I need access to the armory," she said. "I know. And I need to walk the South Ridge in the dark." "I know that too. And you're going to help me." Marcus Hale picked up his coffee cup and drained the last of it and set it back down on the table with the finality of a man who had already decided before she arrived at the base, before she walked into the mess facility, possibly before she had even started the drive from Missoula, that this was what the next 24 hours were going to look like. "That's why I'm here," he said. She left the mess facility through the side door and walked out into the Montana cold, and the wind came off the ridge and hit her full in the face, and she stood in it for a moment with her eyes closed and breathed. Somewhere behind her, through 2 walls and the ambient noise of an installation going through its evening routine, she could feel Daniel. She could feel the weight of what she hadn't told him, what she might not be able to tell him before tomorrow, what she might never be able to tell him depending on how tomorrow went. She opened her eyes. The North Ridge was a dark mass against the stars. From where she stood, she could see the rough outline of the terrain that the enemy would use the tree cover, the approach angles, the natural defilade that would shield a moving force until it was within effective range of the perimeter wire. She had stood on ridges like that. She had been the thing moving through the tree cover in the dark. She had been the threat that the people inside the wire didn't know was coming. She understood in a way that no one inside that base fully understood exactly what was coming toward them. And she understood one other thing with a clarity that settled into her bones and stayed there. She was the only person who could stop it. She turned away from the ridge and walked toward the armory, her boots quiet on the frozen ground, the camera bag over her shoulder, her breathing slow and controlled, and already without her consciously deciding, it beginning to settle into the rhythm it had kept across 2 combat deployments, and 89 confirmed, and 3 unconfirmed, and 1 morning in Hellman, when the silence had lasted right up until it didn't. Phantom had been buried for 5 years. She was waking up. The armory at FOB Sentinel was managed by a staff sergeant named Briggs, who had the particular energy of a man who took his inventory extremely seriously and trusted nobody, which under normal circumstances Alyssa would have respected. Under these circumstances, it was a problem. Marcus Hale solved the problem the way he solved most problems, directly and without apology. He walked into the armory at 2114 with the bearing of a man who had outranked everyone in the room for so long that the habit had become cellular, and he told Briggs that he needed access to the precision weapons locker for a training assessment that had been authorized at the installation command level. Briggs looked at him. Then he looked at Alyssa standing behind him with a camera bag over her shoulder. "She's my assistant," Hale said. "She documents the assessment." Briggs looked at the camera bag again. "Sir, I'm going to need written authorization from—" "Sergeant!" Hale's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I have been doing this since before you were in middle school. I need the locker open in the next 60 seconds, or I am going to have a conversation with Captain Carter about the state of readiness in this armory that you are not going to enjoy being part of. Your call." 22 seconds later, the locker was open. Alyssa did not let herself look too long at what was inside. She made herself move with the calm efficiency of someone who was performing a professional task, not someone whose hands had just recognized something the way a musician's hands recognize a specific instrument after years apart. She selected the M110 semi-automatic sniper system and a Remington 700 with a suppressor mount. She checked the bolt on the Remington with a motion that was entirely automatic and entirely invisible. Her fingers found the mechanism without her eyes needing to direct them. Behind her, Briggs made a small sound. She turned. He was looking at her hands. "You shoot?" he asked. "My husband is Army," she said. "He taught me the basics." Briggs nodded slowly. He did not look entirely convinced. She gave him the smile, warm, uncomplicated, and he looked away. Outside the armory, Hale fell into step beside her without speaking. They walked for 2 minutes in the direction of the vehicle bay before he said anything. "Briggs is going to log that access," he said. "I know." When Daniel sees the log, "I know Marcus." He was quiet for another 30 seconds. "How are your hands?" It was a specific question, and they both knew it. He was not asking about her physical condition. He was asking about the thing that happened to precision shooters after extended periods away from the rifle. The recalibration period, the way the body had to relearn the specific stillness required to put a bullet exactly where the mind intended at distances, where any variable at all meant the difference between a hit and a miss, and sometimes between a life and a death. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "When did you last fire a range in Kalispell?" 8 months ago. Pistol only." He absorbed that. 8 months is nothing. Your muscle memory? My muscle memory is fine. It's not the muscle memory I'm worried about. He understood what she meant. He had always understood what she meant, which was one of the things about Marcus Hale that was both invaluable and exhausting. "The mental discipline comes back," he said. "You don't know that. I watched it come back in 47 people I trained. It comes back. I'm not them." "No," he said. "You were better than all of them." She didn't answer. They reached the vehicle bay and moved through it to the maintenance shed on the far side, which was where Hale had staged the rest of what they needed: a spotting scope, 2 radios on a frequency that wasn't in the base's rotation, a detailed topographic map of the surrounding terrain that he had acquired from somewhere she didn't ask about, and 2 cold weather ghillie systems that looked like they had come out of a private equipment cache rather than any military supply chain. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since the first intercept 3 days ago. And you didn't push it up the chain because you didn't have enough." "I didn't push it up the chain because the chain here has a problem," he said. "The base security officer is 26 years old and has never seen a threat more serious than an equipment malfunction. The XO is competent but inflexible. He needs a proper intelligence package before he moves, and by the time we assemble a proper intelligence package, it will be 1340 tomorrow, and the package will be irrelevant." He spread the topographic map on the workbench. "The installation commander is Daniel, who is a good officer and a careful man, and who will spend the first 4 hours after I brief him running verification requests up through channels that will all come back empty because this operation is being run by people who know how to stay out of channels." Alyssa looked at the map. She had already built a version of it in her mind. Seeing it rendered in topographic lines confirmed what she had calculated. They're coming down the North Ridge on a 2-axis approach. Primary force through the tree cover here. She touched the map. Secondary force working the eastern slope to create a crossfire problem at the perimeter wire. They'll time the mortar strike to the moment both forces are in position. "Agreed." "And Kadyrov is running the command element from somewhere elevated with line of sight to the operations center." Hale looked at her carefully. "How do you know the name?" She had said it without thinking. She made herself meet his eyes. "Hellman, 2019, the market in Sangan." He was very still. "You were there." "I was there." He didn't push it. He was one of the few people alive who knew what had happened in Sangan in 2019 and understood what it meant, that she had been present for it, and he had the judgment not to open that door right now when they had 14 hours and a significant tactical problem to solve. "If Kadyrov is commanding this personally," he said, "the target is specific." "Daniel." The words sat between them like something physical. "They have to know he's the installation commander," she said. "That's what package confirmed means. They've done their reconnaissance. They know the command structure. They are not here to damage the base. They're here to eliminate the commanding officer and demonstrate that they can reach inside a U.S. military installation on domestic soil and do it cleanly." She paused. "That's the message. That's the whole point." Hale nodded. She could see him agreeing with an analysis he had already reached independently and had been hoping she would reach a different way. "Tell me what you need," he said. "South Ridge. I want to be in position by 0400. The ridge line is outside the wire." "Yes." If the base goes to alert status and they see movement on the South Ridge, then they'll think it's the enemy and we'll have bigger problems than a friendly fire concern. She was already pulling the Achilles system out of its bag. I need overlapping fields from the South Ridge to cover the north approach and the eastern slope simultaneously. That means two positions. You take the eastern angle. I take the primary. Alyssa, your primary position at 700 to 800 meters. I know what the range is. In cold weather at elevation after 8 months away from a long rifle, Marcus. She looked at him steadily. I know what the range is. He stopped. He had trained her. He knew when she was assessing and when she was certain, and he knew the difference between the two looks on her face, and the look on her face right now was something he had seen perhaps a dozen times in 30 years of working with the best shooters in the American military. It was not assessment. It was not bravado. It was something quieter and more absolute than either. Okay, he said. They worked for 2 hours, going over the plan in detail, firing lanes, communication signals, contingency positions. If one of them was compromised, the decision criteria for opening fire before the enemy reached the wire versus waiting for engagement. They argued twice. Once about the timing of the initial engagement, Hale wanted to wait until the enemy committed to their approach routes and could not reposition. Alyssa wanted to hit the command element first and watch the coordination collapse. Once about the radio protocol, Hale wanted to maintain a channel to the base. Alyssa pointed out that any transmission would alert Daniel to what they were doing before they were ready to explain it. They reached compromises on both. The compromises were not comfortable, but they were tactically sound. And when they were done, they had a plan that was built out of two people who understood the geometry of violence in a way that very few people alive understood it. At 23:30, Alyssa left the maintenance shed and walked back toward the officers' quarters. Daniel was awake. He was sitting at the small table in their room with his laptop open, but when she came through the door, she could see immediately that he had not been reading whatever was on the screen. He had been waiting. His face had the careful neutrality of a man who has been rehearsing a conversation. You were gone for 2 hours, he said. I was with Colonel Hale. We were talking. At 2300. He's not a big sleeper. Daniel closed the laptop. How do you know Marcus Hale? She had known this question was coming. She had been building an answer to it since she walked out of the mess facility, and every version of the answer she had built was either a lie or a door she wasn't ready to open. She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at her husband. He looked back at her with the face she had been looking at for 7 years, intelligent and patient, and very, very tired of waiting for a truth she had been keeping from him since before they got married. We worked together, she said, a long time ago. Worked together how? In a professional capacity. Alyssa, Daniel, you've been behaving like someone running a threat assessment since you got here. You come home from a 2-hour meeting with a retired colonel at 2300, and you tell me you were talking. You said the base feels wrong. I talked to the security officer the way you asked me to, and he ran a quick check and found nothing actionable, and when I texted you that information, you didn't respond. He leaned forward. So I'm asking you directly, what is going on? She looked at him. The weight of everything she hadn't said in 7 years pressed against the inside of her chest with a physical force. She thought about Hale's voice saying you never stopped, and she thought about a ridge in Helmand, and she thought about the way her hands had found the bolt of the Remington in the armory without her eyes needing to guide them. I can't tell you everything right now, she said. I need you to trust me. That is not a good answer. I know. Alyssa, tomorrow. The word came out harder than she intended. She softened it. Tomorrow, after I will tell you everything. I promise you that. Everything. But right now, I need you to do something for me and not ask me why. He looked at her for a long time. The silence in the room was the particular silence of a marriage at its edge, the kind that could break something if it went on too long, or could hold if the two people in it had built enough between them to span it. What do you need, he said finally. Move the morning formation to the interior courtyard, away from the north perimeter. At 1300, put the QRF on standby alert. Don't explain why. Just do it. If I put the QRF on standby alert without a reason, my XO is going to tell him it's a readiness drill. Tell him whatever you need to tell him, but get them on standby at 1300. Liz, if something is actually happening, I know. Then I need to know what it is so I can... Daniel. She put her hand on his arm. She felt him go still under her touch, the way he always did, the way he had done since the first year of their marriage, when she had understood that physical contact was the language he heard most clearly under all the other noise. I need you to trust me. One more time. One more day. He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her face. She watched him make the decision that 7 years of a marriage had built him toward the decision to trust the woman he had chosen, even when the woman he had chosen was giving him every reason to be afraid. 1300 QRF standby, he said. Formation in the interior courtyard. Thank you. After tomorrow, he said, you're going to tell me everything. After tomorrow, she said, I will. He nodded. He opened his laptop again, but he wasn't reading. She could see the tension in his shoulders that wouldn't release the precise way a man holds himself when he knows something is coming and cannot see its shape. She turned off the light on her side and lay down and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. At 3:20, her internal clock brought her fully awake. She dressed in the dark with the automatic efficiency of 1,000 early mornings in a different life, and she was at the door when Daniel's voice came from the dark behind her. Be careful, he said. She stopped. She didn't turn around. I always am, she said. She went out into the Montana cold, and the stars were extraordinary, and the North Ridge was a dark mass against them, and she did not look at it. She walked to the vehicle bay where Hale was waiting, already suited, in the cold weather ghillie, the spotting scope over his shoulder, the Remington cased and ready. He looked at her when she arrived. How much does he know? Enough. Did you tell him no? Hale nodded. He handed her the rifle case. She took it, and for a moment just held it, the specific weight of it, the balance, the way the case itself transferred a density that her body remembered before her mind caught up. It's going to come back, he said quietly. Stop saying that. I'll stop saying it when you stop needing to hear it. They went out through the maintenance shed's back access and moved into the terrain beyond the perimeter wire in a silence that was professional and total. The cold was immediate and complete, a Montana February night at 6,200 feet that pressed against every exposed surface with patient hostility. She moved through it with the automatic efficiency of a body that had operated in worse cold, in worse places, with worse things waiting at the end of the movement. They reached the South Ridge at 4:17. It took her 11 minutes to establish her position, the specific 11-minute routine of preparing a hide that was invisible from above, invisible from the north, and provided unobstructed sight lines across the 830 meters of mountain terrain between her and the North Ridge tree line. Hale moved to his eastern angle position 200 meters to her right without speaking. They had said everything that needed saying in the maintenance shed. She settled into the hide and found the rifle and laid it alongside her body and let the cold work its way through the ghillie and into her bones the way cold always did. And she breathed. In, hold, wait. In, hold. Oh. The breathing pattern was as old as her body's memory of what it meant to be phantom. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 6 counts out. Repeat until the heart rate fell below 60. Repeat until the world narrowed to the scope and the wind and the distance and the target. She looked through the spotting scope at the North Ridge tree line. Nothing. Darkness and trees and the natural movement of wind through branches. She breathed and waited and did not move. An hour passed, then 2. The cold worked deeper. She let it. She had been colder than this. She had been so cold in a hide and helmet that she had been unable to feel her trigger finger and had shot anyway and hit the target anyway because the shot did not require feeling. The shot required calculation and stillness and the absolute refusal to let anything cold, fear, doubt, grief, love interrupt the space between decision and execution. At 6:44, Hale's voice came through the radio earpiece in a breath that was barely sound. Movement, North Ridge, eastern tree line. She shifted the spotting scope. There, a shadow that moved wrong with the specific wrongness of a human body trying not to move like a human body. And then another, and another. They were already on the ridge. They had been on the ridge since before she took her position, which meant they had moved in the night, which meant the operation was already further along its timeline than she had calculated. She pressed the radio, 1 click. Hale acknowledged with 1 click. Her heart rate, which had been at 58 for the last 90 minutes, went to 61, and she brought it back down in 4 breaths. Through the scope, she counted movement signatures. 6, 8, 12. This was not a small operation. And then she saw the command element, 3 figures positioned on the highest point of the North Ridge, with the elevated sight line to the base that she had predicted, and one of the 3 figures was giving directional signals to the forces below with the economical authority of someone who had done this many times in many places. She could not see his face at this distance. She did not need to. She recognized the way Ramzan Kadyrov stood on a ridgeline, like he owned it, the way she had recognized it once before across a distance of 900 meters, in a province of Afghanistan, where the dust tasted like copper, and the dead were everywhere, and the living didn't always understand the difference. He was here. He was real. And he was looking directly at the base where her husband was sleeping. The rage came first, white and total and immediate the way it always had, the way she had never been able to stop it from arriving. She let it come, and then she let it move through her, the way she had been trained, the way Marcus Hale had taught her, in a range in Quantico when she was 22 years old. Feel it completely and release it completely, because rage is a form of energy, and energy that is held becomes tremor, and tremor kills the shot. She released it. What remained was something else entirely. Something colder than the Montana air and more precise than any instrument she had ever held. She found her breathing pattern, and she found her position, and she put the crosshairs of the scope onto the ridgeline, and she waited. 13 hours and 40 minutes remained until the planned assault. She was already in position, and Ramzan Kadyrov had no idea she existed. She stayed in the hide for 6 hours and 43 minutes, without moving anything except her eyes and her breathing. This was not discipline. Discipline implied effort. What Alyssa did in the hide was something beyond discipline. It was the total surrender of the self to the task, the erasure of comfort and cold and fear, and the slow ache in her left hip that had started at hour 2 and built to something serious by hour 4. She had learned this in training and refined it in Helmand, and spent 5 years trying to unlearn it, and the truth she was confronting now, pressed flat against the Montana earth with a rifle beside her, and a man she recognized standing on a ridgeline 800 meters to the north, was that she had never come close to unlearning it. The body remembered. The body always remembered. At 7:31, Hale clicked twice in her earpiece. New movement. She confirmed with one click and adjusted the spotting scope 3 degrees east. 2 additional figures had joined the command element on the ridge. One of them was carrying what she recognized from the silhouette as a man-portable fire control unit, the kind used to coordinate mortar timing with ground assault movement. The other was moving between the trees with a specific pattern of someone conducting a final reconnaissance check, verifying positions, confirming fields of fire. They were finalizing. The operation was not 13 hours away. The operation was being rehearsed in real time. They would spend the morning locked in position and move at the designated hour, and the preparation happening right now was the last preparation, the kind that happens when the decision has been made, and what remains is only execution. She pressed the radio once. Hale acknowledged. Then his voice barely breathed. "They're already staged. This isn't early reconnaissance. They moved in last night." "I see it," she subvocalized. "If they're staged and the timeline holds, 1340 is confirmed." "The mortar team," she said, "where, a 10-second pause while Hale worked the spotting scope. "Eastern tree line, approximately 60 meters into cover from the ridge lip. I count 2 tubes. 2 tubes? That was the opening 2 mortar positions, dropping rounds on the fuel depot and the perimeter wire, simultaneously creating the chaos that would allow the ground assault to close the distance to the fence line before the base could consolidate a response." She had sketched this in her mind in the mess facility the previous night, and every detail she had projected was now confirming itself in real terrain, in real time. "I'm going to count the ground force," she said, "carefully." She moved the spotting scope in a slow sweep across the North Ridge tree line, reading movement signatures the way a doctor reads a patient, not looking for what was obvious, but for what was trying not to be seen. A boot heel catching moonlight, a barrel catching the first gray light of dawn, a breath cloud in cold air above a position that was otherwise completely still. She counted. She went back and counted again. 38, she clicked to Hale. His response was a long pause, then one click. Confirmed. 38 trained mercenaries on the North Ridge against a base with a quick reaction force of 22 soldiers, a security element of 31, and a support staff that was not combat-oriented. In a straight engagement with complete surprise and the first mortar rounds hitting before anyone was in a defensive position, The numbers were catastrophic. They were not going to have a straight engagement. That was the only thing standing between Fob Sentinel and a body count that would land on the front page of every American newspaper. At 8:15, her earpiece crackled. Hale's voice still low, but with an edge she hadn't heard in it yet. "Liz, check your 2 o'clock, 50 meters." She turned the spotting scope. Her heart did not stop, but it came very close. There was a man in the tree line on the south ridge, on her side of the wire, 30 meters from her position. He was moving slowly through the brush in the direction of the maintenance shed, and he was carrying a rifle, and he was wearing civilian mountain gear, and he had the walk of a professional. A stay-behind element. They had placed a flanking observer on the south ridge before she arrived. He hadn't seen her. Her position was invisible from his approach angle, but he was going to walk directly into her field of vision within the next 90 seconds. She had 3 choices. She could let him pass and accept the risk that he would find her position on his return sweep. She could move to a secondary position and lose her primary firing lane to the north ridge for a critical window. Or she could deal with him directly, which would create noise and potentially alert the command element on the north ridge that something on the south ridge was not right. None of the 3 choices were good. She pressed the radio twice. Hale's response was immediate: 1 click, then a long pause, then 2 more clicks. He had seen the flanker. He was repositioning. She pressed herself completely flat and controlled her breath to absolute minimum movement and watched through the scope as the man moved through the brush 12 meters to her left. He stopped once. He was looking at something, or looking for something, which was worse. He turned his head in a slow scan. She did not move. She did not blink. She let the cold in the ground and the gilly make her into part of the terrain. The man turned and continued moving. He passed within 8 meters of her right arm. She could hear his breathing. She could hear the frost crunch under his boots. He moved past and down the ridge toward the perimeter wire, and she watched him go, and then it tracked him until he reached a position at the base of the south ridge from which he would have a clear view of the maintenance shed and the vehicle bay exterior, and importantly, a clear view of the interior of the base if the perimeter gate on the south side was opened. He wasn't a flanking observer. He was a gate watcher. He was there to report the moment the base responded to the assault, the moment the QRF deployed, the moment command personnel moved, the moment Daniel came out of the operations building. He was a spotter for Kadyrov's personal shot. The realization moved through her in a cold wave that had nothing to do with the temperature. They had planned for Daniel specifically and in detail. The gate watcher's position was not improvised. It was pre-planned, which meant they had done reconnaissance on this base, on this gate, on the movements of this specific commanding officer. They had watched Daniel. They had timed his routines. They knew where he went when the base came under attack. She pressed the radio 3 times, the emergency signal she and Hale had agreed on for a change in threat assessment. His voice came immediately. "What?" "Gate watcher, South Ridge base. His position covers the south gate and the CO's movement pattern." A silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. "They have a shooter's solution on Daniel." "Yes." "From where?" She scanned the north ridge with the spotting scope, looking at the command element's position differently now, not as a command post, but as a firing platform. From the highest point of the north ridge, with a clear sight line to the south gate, the distance to Daniel's likely position at the operations center door was approximately 1,100 meters. Long but not impossible for a shooter of Kadyrov's documented capability. "From the command element position," she said, "Kadyrov isn't just coordinating, he's the shooter. He's going to take the shot himself." "Yes." Another 4-second silence. "Alyssa, I know. If he takes the shot and you're engaged with the ground assault, I know, Marcus. You can't cover both." I said I know. The problem was complete and crystalline and terrible. She had one primary firing position with a viable lane to the north ridge. She had a ground assault with 38 professionals moving toward the perimeter wire that required her sustained engagement to suppress. And she had a high-value enemy shooter at the far end of her range who was going to put a bullet into her husband the moment Daniel walked out of the operations center in response to the attack. She could stop the assault or she could protect Daniel. She could not do both from a single position. At 9 o'clock, she made a decision. She pressed the radio. "I need to move. If you abandon your primary..." "I'm not abandoning it. I'm splitting the work. You take the primary. You can cover the ground assault lanes from your eastern position with the M11. Oh, a pause. I'm not Phantom Lies. You're close enough. You trained everyone who was ever close enough. She was already calculating the movement, the approach to a secondary position that would give her an 1,100-meter solution to the command element while sacrificing the close-range suppression coverage of the ground assault. It was worse mathematics than her primary position. The shot was harder. The risk was higher. She had made harder shots. If I move to the secondary, you're carrying the assault suppression alone, she said. 38 targets in a compressed assault window. You'll need to prioritize the mortar teams first. I know how to prioritize. The machine gun teams second. If the machine gun teams establish at the wire, the QRF can't consolidate. Alyssa, I know. She almost smiled. Sorry. Move when you're ready. I'll cover. She spent 40 seconds committing every detail of her current position to memory, the wind, the elevation change, the precise angle of the terrain between her and the North Ridge, because she was going to need all of it when she settled into the secondary and made a calculation that could not be wrong. Then she moved. Movement in a ghillie suit in daylight across open terrain at an elevation where visibility was extraordinary required a specific form of patience that existed somewhere between movement and stillness, slow enough to be invisible, purposeful enough to cover ground. She covered 80 meters in 11 minutes and reached the secondary position, which was a natural depression in the ridgeline that gave her exactly the sight line she needed to the North Ridge command element. She settled in, found the rifle, found her breathing, looked through the scope. The command element was still in position. 3 figures, Kadyrov at the center, the fire control operator on his left, a personal security detail on his right. They had not moved in 3 hours. They were comfortable in their position, which meant they felt entirely secure, which meant they had no idea she existed. For the moment, that was exactly right. At 10:30, her radio crackled. Not hail, a different frequency, the base's internal channel that she had set her second radio to monitor. Daniel's voice. All personnel, this is actual. Formation at 1200 hours will be held in the interior courtyard. QRF elements, you are on standby alert, effective 1300. This is a readiness exercise, acknowledged by unit. She heard the acknowledgements come in one by one, heard the faint skepticism in the voices of the senior NCOs who knew a last-minute readiness exercise smelled like something other than a readiness exercise. Heard Daniel's voice remain level and authoritative through all of it, giving nothing away. She felt something tighten in her chest. He had done it. Without a full explanation, without knowing everything, he had trusted her enough to move the formation and alert the QRF. And she understood exactly what that had cost him in terms of his credibility with his staff, and she understood that he had paid that cost without hesitation. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of a man choosing to trust the woman he had married, even when the woman he had married could not explain herself. She breathed through the tightness and brought her heart rate back to 58. At 11:45, the gate watcher on the south ridge moved. She tracked him with the spotting scope as he repositioned 15 meters east along the ridge base, adjusting his angle to maintain visual coverage of the south gate or as the sun moved. The adjustment was professional and deliberate. He had done this before. He was patient. She was more patient. At 1200, she watched through the scope as the personnel formation assembled in the interior courtyard, invisible from the North Ridge, sheltered from the mortar impact zones she had calculated. 200 feet from where they would have been standing if Daniel had not moved them. The math of that was not abstract. If the first mortar round hit on schedule and the formation was in its standard position at the flagpole, she was looking at 20 to 30 casualties in the opening 30 seconds. Daniel had moved them. She pressed the radio once. Hale acknowledged. At 12:30, something changed on the North Ridge. She saw it in the command element first, a shift in posture, a tightening in the spacing between the 3 figures that indicated communication was happening. Then she saw movement in the tree line, the ground assault elements beginning to shift forward, closing the distance to their assault positions. They were moving early, not by much. 15-20 minutes ahead of the planned timeline. But enough. She pressed the radio 3 times. I see it, Hale said immediately. They're adjusting. Something spooked them. The QRF alert. His voice was flat. Someone on the base talked. She felt the cold move through her that was not the temperature. Someone inside the wire had passed information to the assault element, The QRF alert, possibly the formation change enough to tell Kadyrov that something on the base was not normal. Not enough to abort, but enough to accelerate. New timeline, she said. I'm estimating 13:15, maybe earlier. 25 minutes, maybe less. Marcus, she said, I'm ready. The mortar teams go first. The moment they shift to firing position, I know. If they get the first round off. Alyssa, I know. A pause, a breath. Are you ready? She looked through the scope at the North Ridge command element, at the center figure who stood with the specific stillness of a man watching a plan he had spent months building begin its final movement toward execution. At the man who had come to this mountain in the dead of Montana winter with 38 soldiers and 2 mortar tubes and a personal shooter solution on her husband. She found her breathing pattern, in, hold, out. She found the wind 14 kilometers per hour from the northwest, consistent with a minor gust pattern she had been tracking for 2 hours and understood. She found the elevation differential. The command element position was 31 meters above her secondary position, which affected bullet drop across 1,100 meters in ways she calculated automatically and continuously. She found the crosshairs. She found her heart rate at 56 and brought it to 54. Yes, she said. The Northridge was quiet in the way that only exists in the seconds before something violent and irreversible begins. The ground assault elements were in their final positions. The mortar teams were shifting. The command element was still, and somewhere below her in a base that did not know what was about to happen to it. Her husband was standing in the interior courtyard with 200 people whose lives depended on what she did in the next 20 minutes. The wind moved through the pines. She did not move at all. At 13:09, the first mortar team on the North Ridge shifted to their firing position. Hale fired, and the world came apart. Hale's first shot hit the mortar team loader at 13:09 and 11 seconds, and for exactly 3 heartbeats after that, the North Ridge was completely silent. Then everything happened at once. The second mortar team broke from their position and scattered into the tree line, which was the correct professional response, and also exactly what Alyssa had predicted they would do. And Hale's second shot caught the tube operator before he cleared the tree line and dropped him at the edge of cover. 1 tube silenced. 1 tube still viable crew scattered but not eliminated. And she could hear through the cold mountain air the sound of shouting in a language she recognized from 2 deployments and 100 hours of language training in a morning in Helmand that she would never stop carrying. The ground assault was moving. She could feel it without seeing it, the shift in weight on the North Ridge, the compression of 36 remaining professionals pushing toward their assault lanes with the momentum of men who have been trained to continue the mission when the first element of the plan fails. A disrupted mortar team did not stop this assault. These were not men who stopped, but she was not looking at the ground assault. She was looking at the command element. At 13:09 and 40 seconds, Kadyrov did something she had not predicted. He did not go to ground. He did not move to a covered position. He turned toward the source of Hale's shots with the precise, unhurried attention of a man identifying a problem, and she watched him through the scope assess the South Ridge with the professional thoroughness of someone who had spent 30 years identifying threats that other people had missed. He was looking for them. He's scanning, she sub-vocalized into the radio. I see it. Hale's voice was controlled but tight. He's good. Don't engage the command element. Stay on the assault. Leistung, stay on the assault. The ground force reaches the wire and we lose the base. Kadyrov is mine. A half-second pause. Confirmed. The fire control operator on Kadyrov's left, where he was gesturing urgently, she could read it even at 1,100 meters, the body language of a man pushing his commander toward cover, toward the ground, toward any position that was not standing upright in the open, while an unidentified shooter worked the ridge. Kadyrov put one hand on the operator's arm and said something that stopped the gesturing completely. Then he raised his own optic and began scanning the South Ridge methodically. She pressed herself into the earth and did not breathe. He scanned left to right across her position. The gilly, the frozen ground, the total stillness she had trained into her body over years. All of it working now the way it was designed to work. He passed over her position without stopping. Continued right. Stopped on Hale's secondary position. He's got your angle, she said. I know. I moved. Hale's voice came from a slightly different acoustic position in her earpiece, which meant he had already shifted. Second assault element is at the wire, southwest gap. The southwest gap, the 4-meter opening between barriers C7 and C9 that she had identified on her first afternoon, and that the patrol interval left exposed for 40 minutes at a time. The secondary assault force was going through it right now, which meant the perimeter was breached, which meant the interior of the base was no longer a safe space for the 200 people Daniel had moved into the interior courtyard. Marcus, the courtyard. I heard, 1 second, a shot, a pause. Machine gun team southwest approach, down. Another shot, another pause. Loader, down. The gap is temporarily suppressed. Tell Daniel to move his people to the motor pool. Motor pool has concrete walls on 3 sides. She pressed the second radio, the base frequency. Daniel, this is Alyssa, motor pool. Move everyone to the motor pool right now. Do not go to the operations center. Do not go to the north perimeter, motor pool. 3 seconds of silence that felt like a month, then Daniel's voice, and she had never in 7 years heard him sound exactly like this. Not frightened, because Daniel Carter did not frighten easily, but with the controlled urgency of a man receiving information that has just reorganized everything he thought he understood. Copy that. Motor pool. Alyssa, what is your... I'm outside the wire. I'm fine. Move your people. Outside the Alyssa. Daniel, motor pool, right now. She heard him switch frequencies, heard him issuing the movement order in the clipped, authoritative tone of a man who had trained for years to make decisions under pressure and was now making them. She heard the bass come alive around his voice boots on pavement, shouted acknowledgments, the sound of the QRF consolidating with the disciplined noise of soldiers who had been on standby and were now in motion. He had listened. He was moving them. She turned back to Kadyrov. He had gone to ground. Sometime in the last 40 seconds, he had stopped scanning and dropped below the ridge lip, which meant he had made a decision. Either he had located a target and was preparing to engage, or he had assessed the situation and was repositioning his command element. Either way, she had lost visual on him. I've lost the command element, she said. I'm tied up, Hale said. 3 targets, eastern approach 60 meters from the wire, engaging. She heard his shots, 2, fast one. Pause, 1 more. Heard the specific silence that followed accurate fire. She swept the spotting scope across the North Ridge command element position. Empty. They had moved. She expanded the sweep, looking for the elevated position they would relocate to the secondary command point that any professional force at this level would have pre-planned. She found it. Higher on the ridge, 30 meters above the original position in the rocks at the ridge crest that provided cover from the south but maintained visual to the base. Kadyrov was there, not standing now prone behind the rocks, with his own long rifle set up on a bipod that he had not had at the original position. He had pre-staged a rifle at his secondary command point. He had planned to make this shot from the beginning. He was looking south, not at the ridge, at the base, at the south gate, at the operations center door. He's at the ridge crest, she said. He's set up. Hale's voice came back, broken by the sound of him firing. I can't break off. 6 targets consolidated at the wire. If they breach, stay on the wire. I have Kadyrov. 1,100 meters had been the distance from her secondary position to the original command element location. The ridge crest was another 30 meters of elevation and approximately 40 meters of horizontal distance. She recalculated without looking away from the scope. 1,160 meters. Elevation differential increased to 53 meters. Wind at this elevation hitting the ridge crest would be channeled by the rock formation. She adjusted the estimated velocity from 14 to 17 kilometers per hour and shifted the direction estimate 8 degrees. The shot was at the absolute outer edge of reliable engagement distance for a Remington 700 in these conditions. In training, she had made confirmed shots at 1,300 meters. In Hellman, she had made 1 shot at 1,140 that was still in the record somewhere under a name that was no longer her name. This was doable. This was inside what she had done before. But Kadyrov was not a stationary target. He was behind cover with only a portion of his upper body exposed as he worked his own optic. The exposure window was approximately 18 inches of viable target area, and he was about to shoot her husband. She found her breathing in. 4 counts, hold. 4 counts, out. 6 counts, in. Below her, the base was in controlled chaos. She could hear it even at this distance, the sound of people moving with purpose rather than panic, which meant Daniel's voice on that radio had done what she needed it to do. She heard the QRF engaging the southwest breach, a sustained exchange of fire that told her the gap was contested, which meant it was not yet lost. Hold. Hale fired twice in rapid succession. Mortar Team 2 is back at the tube, he said, and she could hear in his voice that he was managing more targets than one man could properly manage, and doing it anyway. I need you on the assault elements. I cannot hold the wire alone. Out. She did not move the rifle. He's going to shoot Daniel, she said. I know, Alyssa, if the assault gets through the wire. Marcus, he is going to shoot Daniel in the next 90 seconds. A silence. Just the sound of gunfire from both directions and wind against her earpiece and Hale breathing. Take the shot, he said. I'll hold the wire. In. She found the 18 inches of viable target. She found the wind. She found the 53 meters of elevation differential and the ballistic drop at 1,160 meters and the specific quality of Montana winter air at 6,200 feet that was thinner than the air she had trained in and thinner than the air in Helmand, but within the range of conditions she had internalized over 7 years of living in mountain terrain. She found all of it, and she held all of it simultaneously in the part of her mind that had always been able to do this even when the rest of her mind was conducting an entirely separate negotiation with everything she loved and feared and could not afford to lose. Hold. Through the scope, she watched Kadyrov make a small adjustment to his rifle, the micro movement of a man who has found his target and is settling into his firing solution. He had Daniel. She understood that with total certainty. He had found Daniel somewhere in the base's movement, identified him through his scope, and was now doing exactly what she was doing, breathing, settling, preparing. She had maybe 15 seconds. Out. She stopped breathing entirely. The world went completely quiet in the way it only goes quiet when a decision has been made and what remains is only its execution, when the mind releases everything that is not the shot, everything that is not the wind, and the distance and the weight of the trigger, and the precise moment when all of it converges into the single, irreversible instant of fire. She squeezed. The Remington fired. She stayed on the scope through the recoil and watched. For 1 second, one full, unbearable, absolute second, she could not see what had happened. Kadyrov's position was obscured by the rock formation as she reacquired. She was recalculating, already running the adjustments for a follow-up shot, already accepting that the first shot may have been wrong, and that she had one chance to correct before Kadyrov fired and Daniel Kadyrov's rifle came off the bipod. Not in the controlled way of a man shifting his position, in the sudden total way of a body that has ceased to direct itself. He was down. She did not exhale immediately. She watched for 4 full seconds, watched the position, watched the fire control operator scrambling backward away from the ridge, crest, watched the personal security detail breaking in 2 different directions, with the panicked movement of men who have just watched their commander go down and have not yet processed where the shot came from. Then she exhaled. Command element is down, she said. Kadyrov is down. Hale's response was not words. It was a single sharp breath, the sound of a man receiving confirmation of something he had needed to be true. Then I need you on the assault. Right now, wire is holding, but I've got 2 elements trying to flank the QRF position. Eastern wall, 50 meters. She was already moving the rifle, already recalculating the range to the eastern perimeter, already back in the rhythm. I'm on it, she said. What followed was 11 minutes. She would think about those 11 minutes for the rest of her life in the specific nonlinear way that combat compresses into a series of images that arrive without chronological order and without warning, and always with total fidelity. The way memory preserves the moments that matter by refusing to release them. She remembered the first shot after Kadyrov, 695 yards, a machine gunner who had gotten his weapon to the wire and was setting up a fire position that would have swept the QRF's consolidation point. She remembered the calculation as automatic and the shot as clean and the result as immediate, and the feeling attached to it as nothing, not satisfaction, not guilt, not the complicated amalgam of both that she had lived with for years. Just the next problem. She remembered Hale's voice steady and clinical, calling targets by position and distance, with the efficiency of a man who had spent 22 years teaching people to do exactly what they were both doing now. She remembered that his voice never cracked. She remembered being grateful for that in a way she would not fully understand until later. She remembered the moment at 1323 when the assault force began to break. Not all at once, but in the specific sequential way that a coordinated assault breaks, when its command structure collapses and its support elements are being systematically removed, and the soldiers who remain begin performing the individual calculation that every soldier eventually performs when the math of survival becomes undeniable. She remembered seeing the first 3 break from the wire and move back up the North Ridge, then 5 more, then a group of 8 moving together with the urgency of men who are no longer advancing. She remembered pressing the base radio and saying, "QRF assault force is breaking. North Ridge. Do not pursue beyond the wire," because pursuit beyond the wire meant her soldiers moving into terrain she could not cover and into contact with a retreating force that was still armed and still dangerous. She remembered Daniel's voice acknowledging. His voice had changed in the minutes since she had last heard it, steadied into something that told her he had found his footing, that he was commanding, that the 200 people in the motor pool were safe and the soldiers at the wire were holding. She remembered a shot at 1329 that she almost missed. Almost, a target at 580 meters moving fast along the wire in the dead angle between her primary lane and Hale's eastern lane, a narrow window, a moving target, a shot she would not have attempted in training because training was where you learn limits. She attempted it. She hit. She remembered the silence at 1331. It arrived without announcement. One moment there was gunfire and movement, and the radio carrying voices and the wind carrying the sounds of a fight, and then there was not. The silence came in stages, the near sounds first, then the middle distance, then the far sounds dying off one by one, until what remained was only the wind and her own breathing and the blood moving through her hands. "Status," she said into the radio. Hale's voice. "Assault force has withdrawn. I'm counting movement signatures at the North Ridge tree line. They're going back up." A pause. "I make it 11, maybe 12 personnel. From 38. She did the math without wanting to. "Wire is intact," he continued. "QRF is at the perimeter. Base is secure." Another pause. Longer. "We're done." She did not move immediately. She stayed in the position and kept the scope on the North Ridge until the last movement signature disappeared into the tree line and the ridge was simply a ridge again. Terrain, rock, trees, sky. Then she put her forehead down against the frozen ground and breathed. Not the controlled tactical breathing of the last 11 minutes. Just breathing. Just the simple act of filling her lungs and releasing them and being alive to do it. She did not know how long she stayed like that. Not long. The cold would not permit it, and there were things that needed doing, and she had never in her life been someone who stayed on the ground when there were things that needed doing. She got up. She secured the rifle. She pressed the base radio. "Daniel." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It's over. The base is secure. Don't let anyone go to the north perimeter until EOD has swept for secondary devices. The southwest gap needs to be held." A silence. Then his voice. And she could hear in it the precise complexity of a man who had just lived through something he did not yet fully understand and was looking at his radio as though it had become an object he had never seen before. Alyssa. Her name, just her name, and everything that had ever been between them was in the 2 syllables of it. "Where are you, South Ridge? I'm coming in." "Are you, He stopped, started again. "Are you hurt?" "No." Another silence. She could hear him breathing. "You need to tell me," he said. "Everything." "I know. Not some of it, everything." "I know, Daniel. When you come through that gate." "Everything," she said. "I promise." She heard him make a sound that was not quite a word. Then she heard him start issuing orders to his security element and professional controlled the voice of a commanding officer managing his installation in the aftermath of a crisis. And underneath all of it, she could hear the thing he was managing that had nothing to do with the installation. She picked up the rifle case. She looked at the North Ridge one final time. The ridge was empty. The sky above it was the deep winter blue of Montana in February, utterly indifferent to everything that had just happened beneath it. She turned her back on it and started walking toward the wire. Hale fell into step beside her at the base of the south ridge, materializing from the terrain, the way he always had the spotting scope over his shoulder, and his ghillie half removed, and his face carrying the specific exhaustion of a 65-year-old man who has just spent 4 hours in a cold weather hide and 30 minutes in sustained combat engagement and has not complained about either. They walked for a while without speaking. 13 confirmed, he said finally. I counted 11 shots. 2 of yours. 4 of mine. You counted wrong. She absorbed that. You were managing 36 targets alone. I was managing 22 targets alone. You were managing 14 from the secondary position and didn't tell me. He looked at her sidelong. Your shot count is wrong because you stopped counting your own shots after Kadyrov. You went on automatic. She had. She knew it now that he said it the way the 11 minutes had compressed into movement and calculation, without the narrating layer of consciousness that normally tracked what she was doing. Pure function, pure phantom. The base would have been overrun, she said. It was not pride, it was simply the assessment. Yes, Hale said, it would have. You held the wire. We held the wire. He stopped walking and looked at her. The gate was 40 meters ahead. She could see soldiers at the perimeter, and beyond them the activity of a base recovering from something it was still trying to understand. Alyssa, what you did today. Don't. I'm going to say it anyway. Marcus, what you did today is not something that gets buried again. His voice was quiet and entirely serious. You understand that. It gets documented, it gets recorded, and it changes what comes next for you. She looked at the gate, at the base beyond it, at the life she had been living inside that base for 5 years. The camera, the careful smile, the woman she had built from the pieces of the woman she used to be. I know, she said. Daniel is going to have questions. I know. The army is going to have questions. I know that too. He nodded. Good. He started walking again. Then let's go answer them. She walked through the gate at 1347. Daniel was standing 30 feet inside the perimeter. He was still in his command posture, squared, controlled, the bearing of a captain who had just managed a crisis and had not yet allowed himself to stop managing it. But when she came through the gate, something in him shifted, and the bearing gave way to something that had nothing to do with rank or command. He crossed to her in 4 steps and stopped, and he looked at her, at the ghillie, at the rifle case, at her face with the expression of a man seeing something he has been looking at for 7 years and is only now actually seeing. She let him look. You were on the ridge, he said, the whole time. Yes. You were, he stopped, looked at the rifle case. Alyssa, I told you there was something wrong. You said the base felt wrong. You didn't say. He stopped again. There were soldiers within earshot, and he was still their commanding officer. And there were protocols for this moment that his training was fighting to apply. He won the fight barely. He lowered his voice. You didn't say you were going to go outside the wire in the dark with a rifle. If I had told you, you would have stopped me. Yes, flat, immediate. I would have. And 38 mercenaries would have hit this base at 1340 with 2 mortar teams, and no opposition from the outside, and the QRF would have been trapped between the depot fire and the southwest breach. And stop. His voice broke on the word, not with anger, with something else. Just stop. She stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him process all of it, everything the last 4 hours had shown him about the woman he had married, the things she had not told him, the specific quality of capability she had just demonstrated on a Montana ridgeline while he was inside the wire managing an evacuation. 25 people, he said finally. The security officer counted. 25 people who were in positions that would have been direct casualty zones if the assault had gone uncontested. Yes, 25 people. He said it again as though the number needed saying twice to become real. And you were out there the whole time. Hale was with me. I'm not talking about Hale. He reached out and put his hand on her arm, the same gesture she had used on him the night before, the physical language they had built between them over 7 years. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about my wife who drove up here to take photographs and spent last night outside the wire in a ghillie suit and just... He stopped. His hand tightened on her arm slightly. Who are you? It was the right question. It was the question she had been asking herself for 5 years. I'll tell you everything, she said. All of it. Everything I didn't tell you before we got married, and everything I didn't tell you after. All of it. He held her eyes. Starting when? Starting now, she said, if you're ready. He was quiet for one moment. Just one. Then he nodded once the way Daniel Carter nodded when he had made a decision he intended to keep. I'm ready, he said. The Montana wind moved through the base, cold and clean, and carrying nothing but itself, and she stood in it with the rifle case in her hand and her husband's hand on her arm, and the weight of 11 minutes and 5 years, and a life she had buried, and a life she had built, and she understood that all of it was about to become one thing instead of two. She was ready too. She told him everything in the operations center with the door closed and a cup of coffee going cold between her hands, and Marcus Hale sitting in the corner because she had asked him to stay, not for support but for accuracy, because there were parts of the story that she had never said out loud, and she did not entirely trust herself to say them correctly the first time. She started at the beginning, the real beginning. Not the version she had told Daniel when they met, the version where she was a Marine administrative specialist who left the service after 4 years and found photography and built a life she loved. That version had enough truth in it to hold its shape under casual examination, which was exactly why she had chosen it. She had been good at choosing stories that held their shape. The real beginning was Quantico in 2012 when a recruiting officer had watched her shoot a qualification course and then asked her to stay after and shoot it again with 3 targets added and the range lights cut to 40%. She had shot it again and hit everything, and the recruiting officer had made a phone call. And 2 weeks later, she had a new assignment and a new designation and a call sign that nobody used in any official record. Phantom. Daniel listened. He sat across from her with his hands flat on the table and his face doing the careful thing it did when he was processing information that was reorganizing his understanding of something fundamental. She had seen that face when they had bad news about a deployment extension. She had seen it when his father died. She had not seen it like this with this specific quality of stillness, as though he was afraid that if he moved, some essential thing would break. She told him about Helmand, about the 89 confirmed kills in the official record, which was already a number that most people would struggle to hold in their heads without flinching. And then she told him about the 3 that weren't in the record. She told him about Sangin in 2019, the market the morning, the specific sequence of events that had ended her career and her call sign, and the woman she had been, and left her with a camera and a new name and a life she was building from whatever remained. She did not make it dramatic. She made it precise, because the precise version was the only honest version, and she owed him honesty in exactly the same proportion that she had given him something else for 7 years. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Daniel did not speak immediately. She watched him watch the processing. Watched him move through something she could not entirely see but could feel in the quality of his silence. Hale had not moved from the corner. His coffee was cold too. Then Daniel said, "The 3 in Sangin. Yes, they weren't targets. 1 was, 2 weren't." She held his eyes. "I made a call in a situation where the intelligence was wrong and the timeline was compressed, and I made the call I was trained to make, and it was the wrong call. And when I understood it was the wrong call, I had nothing left that felt worth keeping." "So you buried it." "I buried everything." She paused. "I buried her and I built someone else, and I met you and I meant every single part of what I built. I want you to know that. The life I made with you, I chose that. I chose you. That was not a cover. That was not a story I was running." He looked at her for a long time. "But you kept the other one alive." "I didn't keep her alive. I couldn't make her die." She heard her own voice and the precision of it surprised her. "There is a difference. I tried to make Phantom die. I just couldn't figure out how." Daniel was quiet again. Hale was a still point in the corner. "Yesterday morning," Daniel said, "when I watched you come through that gate, the ghillie, the rifle case, I want to tell you I was surprised." He paused. "But there's a part of me, the part that has been watching you for 7 years, that looked at you walking through that gate and thought, there she is. Like I had been waiting to see something I already knew was there and couldn't name." She felt something move in her chest. Not breaking, the opposite. "Are you angry?" she said. "Yes." "Okay. Not about the shooting, not about what you did today. What you did today is the reason 25 people are going home to their families." His voice was measured and she could hear the effort in the measurement. I'm angry about 7 years of a woman I love choosing to carry something alone that she didn't have to carry alone. I'm angry about that. I know. I'm angry that you thought I wouldn't be able to handle it. It wasn't that you couldn't handle it. She leaned forward. I couldn't handle what happened if you knew. I couldn't handle the look on your face when you found out what I actually am, what I actually did. She stopped. I was protecting myself. That's the honest answer. I was protecting myself by calling it protecting you. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it with the same quality of care he gave everything thoroughly without shortcuts all the way to the bottom. The look on my face right now, he said, is it what you were afraid of? She looked at his face. She looked at it carefully, the way she looked at terrain, reading everything that was actually there rather than what she expected to find. What was on his face was not what she had feared for 7 years. What was on his face was something she did not have a single word for. It was grief and respect and love and exhaustion and a kind of recognition that went deeper than any emotion she could name cleanly. No, she said quietly, it's not. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked down at his hand and then up at his face, and something that had been held tight in her chest for a very long time. Not today, not this year, for a very long time, released itself slowly and completely, the way a body releases tension. It has been carrying so long, it forgot. The tension was there. She did not cry. She had not cried since Sengen, and she did not cry now, but she felt the release, and it was the most violent thing that had happened to her in 11 years of doing violent things. At 15:30, the Army came, not informally. Formally, 2 vehicles from the regional command, 1 JAG officer, 1 intelligence officer from a unit whose designation appeared nowhere in any public organizational chart, and a colonel who introduced himself as Colonel Pryor, and who had the bearing of a man who had spent the last 3 hours making phone calls, and had found each phone call more complicated than the last. They set up in the conference room, which was barely large enough for the people in it, and they went through everything. The SIGINT intercept, the assault timeline, the tactical decisions Alyssa and Hale had made over the previous 16 hours, the engagement on the South Ridge, the shot count, the confirmed eliminations, the state of the assault force at withdrawal. Pryor asked most of the questions. He was thorough and specific, and he listened to the answers with the quality of attention of someone who already knew what the answers were going to be and was verifying rather than discovering. The intelligence officer who gave his name as Marsh and nothing else asked a small number of questions and wrote nothing down, which meant he was recording which Alyssa noted and did not comment on. When they reached Kadyrov, Pryor set down his pen. You're telling me you identified Ramzan Kadyrov on the North Ridge at a distance of 1,100 meters, he said, without direct facial confirmation. Correct, she said, based on movement signature command behavior, positioning and prior direct observation from a distance of 900 meters in Helmand Province in 2019 during an operation that is in the classified record under the designation I had at that time. She paused. You can pull it. The gait is distinctive. He has a hip rotation on the right side from a wound he took in 2016. It's in the file. Pryor looked at Marsh. Marsh gave a small nod. And your shot, Pryor said, from the secondary position, 1,160 meters in a cold weather environment at altitude. Correct. The body has been recovered. The ballistic evidence is consistent with your account. I know. Mrs. Carter. It's Sergeant Carter, Hale said from the corner. His voice was entirely quiet and entirely final. Her designation was Sergeant. Whatever she called herself after, that's what she was. That's the courtesy. Pryor looked at Hale. Then he looked back at Alyssa. Then he said, Sergeant Carter, what you did today will be documented as one of the most consequential defensive engagements conducted by a single operator on domestic soil in the history of this command. He paused. I want to be direct with you about what that means. It means you have questions about what comes next, she said. Yes. You want to know if I'm interested in a formal reinstatement. Pryor was quiet for a moment. Are you, She had known this question was coming since she walked back through the gate. She had been thinking about it with the part of her mind that was always thinking about things, the part that never fully rested, that processed and calculated and assessed even when the rest of her was doing something else entirely. I'm interested in a conversation, she said. I'm not interested in disappearing again. Whatever I do next, Daniel knows. All of it. Whatever role I take, he's part of that decision. That's not negotiable. Understood. And the Sengen record, the classification on those three individuals. I want that reviewed, not to protect myself, because the families deserve to know what happened and why, and I've spent 6 years carrying the weight of a decision that was made in a situation that no record currently reflects accurately. The room was very quiet. Marsh looked up from not writing for the first time. That's a significant request, Pryor said carefully. I know what it is. She met his eyes. I'm making it anyway. Daniel, who had been sitting beside her without speaking for the last 40 minutes, put his hand on the table next to hers. Not on top of it, next to it, letting her feel him there without directing anything. She appreciated that more than she could say. Pryor exchanged a look with Marsh. Marsh gave another small nod, different from the first one, less confirmation, more concession. We'll open the review, Pryor said. After the Army left at 1700, the base existed in the particular state that follows violence. When the violence is over and the accounting has begun, that specific mixture of relief and grief and physical exhaustion and the strange flatness that arrives when adrenaline has fully metabolized, and what remains is just the actual weight of what happened. Alyssa found Hale at the south perimeter fence looking out at the ridge in the late afternoon light. She stood beside him and they both looked at the terrain for a while without speaking. Pryor is going to offer you something too, she said. He already called my cell at 1445. Hale's voice had the dry quality of a man who was not surprised by anything and had made his peace with that a long time ago. He wants me back in an advisory capacity, training and assessment. Are you going to take it? I'm 65 years old. He paused. Yes, probably. She almost smiled. You were never going to retire. I retired. I came out of retirement when the intercept landed on my desk 3 days ago, and I understood what it meant. He looked at her sidelong, and when I checked the duty roster and saw that the installation commander's wife was scheduled to visit. A pause. I requested this posting, Alyssa. She turned to look at him. I knew about the threat 8 days ago, he said. I knew who the target was. I knew the base's defensive vulnerabilities. And I knew there was one asset in proximity who was capable of addressing all three problems simultaneously. He held her eyes. So I requested the posting, and I called in a favor to get it approved in 48 hours, and I came here. She stood very still. You came here for me. I came here because the situation required what you are, and because you deserve to make the choice yourself instead of having it made for you. He turned back to the ridge. I wasn't going to drag Phantom back. I was going to put Phantom in a position where Phantom could decide. She thought about that. She thought about the maintenance shed the night before last and the topographic map and the two of them building a plan in the cold while the base slept around them. And she understood now that the plan had been building for 8 days and the night before last was not its beginning. You could have told me, she said. If I had told you, you would have argued. I would have argued and then done it anyway. Yes, he said. But the argument would have cost time we didn't have, and more importantly, it would have made it feel like my decision instead of yours. He was quiet for a moment. You needed it to be your decision. She stood with that. The wind came off the ridge and hit her, and she stood in it without moving. He was right. She had needed it to be her decision. She had needed to walk out of the mess facility and move toward the armory of her own volition, to lie in the cold for 6 hours of her own choosing, to put her eye to the scope and her finger to the trigger, because she had decided, not because she had been ordered, not because she had been recruited, not because someone had told her that Phantom was needed. Because Alyssa Carter, who had cameras and a husband and a life she had built and loved, had looked at a base full of people who were about to be killed and had understood that she was the only person who could stop it and had chosen to be that person. Thank you, she said. Hale made a small sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite dismissal, and was entirely Marcus Hale. Don't thank me. I put you in a position where you had to shoot someone. You put me in a position where I got to choose. She looked at him. That's different. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, yes, it is. At 1900, after the base had settled into the specific, exhausted quiet of an evening following crisis, after the after-action protocols were complete and the perimeter had been reinforced and the medical personnel had finished their accounting, and every soldier who needed to be somewhere had been sent there. Alyssa Carter walked to the South Ridge, not with a rifle, not with a spotting scope, with nothing. She walked to the place where her hide had been, and she stood in it, and she looked north at the ridge where the assault had come from, and south at the base where the people she had protected were eating dinner and filing reports and calling home to their families, and she felt the whole of the day settle into her body, not as trauma, not as triumph, but as fact. Simple, irreducible fact. She heard boots behind her. She knew the weight of them. Daniel came and stood beside her, and he had changed out of his command uniform into something more ordinary, and he looked in the late light like the man she had chosen, the one she had always known, and the one she was still learning. They stood together on the ridge for a while without speaking, looking at the same terrain from the same position, which was new between them. They had stood in many places together. They had not stood here. I looked up your record, he said, the parts I could access. She waited. 89 confirmed, he said. That's in the record. 12 commendations, 4 classified deployments. A pause. The call sign Phantom appears in 3 separate action reports when filed by other units as a reference to unaffiliated fire support that changed the outcome of the engagement. He paused again. Unaffiliated, because you were so far outside the standard command structure that the units you were supporting didn't even know your designation. That was the point. You saved people, he said. A lot of people, over a long time, people who never knew your name and still don't. I know. Sangan. His voice did not waver. You told me about Sangan, and I've been thinking about it since you told me. And here is what I think. I think you made a decision in a situation where the information was wrong, and the time was 0, and you made the best call you had the tools to make, and it was wrong, and you have been punishing yourself for it since 2019 at a cost that I am only beginning to understand. He turned to look at her. That's what I think. It doesn't change what happened. No, it doesn't. He didn't look away. But it changes what you do with it. She looked at him, at the face she had been looking at for 7 years that she had thought she knew completely, and was now understanding she had only known partially because she had kept the most essential part of herself from it, and without that part, the picture was always incomplete. I don't know who I am right now, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said in years. I don't know if I'm Alyssa or Phantom or something that hasn't had a name yet. You're both, he said simply. That's not a clean answer. No, it's not. He reached out and took her hand, and she let him. You're the woman who drove 4 hours up a mountain because she knew something was wrong and she couldn't ignore it. You're the woman who lay in the cold for 6 hours to protect people she'd never met. You're the woman who told me the truth tonight when the truth was the hardest thing you've ever said. He paused. And you're the woman I married, who makes coffee too strong and argues with me about navigation even when she's right, which is always. He paused again. You're all of it. You're not one or the other. She felt the tightness in her chest again, the release incomplete, this time the thing that was still working its way through. I spent 5 years trying to be just one of them. I know, and you were miserable. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. Not every day. But underneath, I felt it, and I didn't know what it was, and now I know. She looked at their hands, his large and steady and warm in the cold air. Hers, she looked at her right hand, the one that had held the rifle, and she saw what she always saw when she looked at it, and she made herself look at it anyway. What happens now, she said. Now you figure out what the next chapter looks like, he said, and you don't figure it out alone. That's the only thing I'm requiring. He said the word requiring with the deliberate weight of a man who has decided something. Every decision. I'm part of it. Not making it for you. Part of it. That's going to be an adjustment. For both of us, a pause. I'm aware I'm not easy either. Something in her chest that had been wound tight for so long, she had stopped noticing. It loosened 1 more degree. You're not easy, she agreed, but you're worth it. He squeezed her hand once. So are you. You were always worth it. The wind moved across the ridge. She felt it on her face, cold and direct and clean, the specific quality of Montana mountain air that she had been breathing for 2 days, and that had been the backdrop of everything that had happened here. She looked at the North Ridge one final time. She looked at it the way she had trained herself to look at terrain, reading it, understanding it, seeing exactly what it was. It was a ridge where something terrible had almost happened and had been stopped. It was a ridge where a man named Kadyrov had stood and decided to bring violence to this place and had been answered. She had answered it, not as a ghost, not as a weapon without a name, as a woman who knew exactly what she was and had chosen to use it, as Alyssa Carter and as Phantom and as whatever the thing was that contained both of them and had never had a clean name. 3 days after the engagement, the official after-action report landed on Colonel Pryor's desk. It was classified at the highest level the installation's systems could process, which still felt like an understatement to everyone who read it. The report documented 13 confirmed enemy combatants eliminated. One high-value target, Kadyrov, confirmed neutralized at 1,160 meters by a single round. 25 American lives assessed as saved by the early interdiction of the assault force's fire support elements. The base fully intact. In the report's summary section, under the heading of Primary Operator Assessment, someone Marsh, she assumed, or whoever Marsh worked for, had written a single sentence that she read 3 times when Daniel showed it to her. It read, "Operator demonstrated capabilities consistent with elite designation. Recommend immediate formal review for reinstatement and assignment to training and advisory role." Daniel watched her read it. "What do you think?" "I think it's a beginning," she said. "Is that what you want, a beginning?" She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. She thought about Hale coming out of retirement for 8 days because a situation required what she was. She thought about lying in the cold for 6 hours with a rifle she had not held in 5 years and finding that every calculation was still there, every instinct still intact, every piece of the woman she had tried to bury still fully alive and fully functional. She thought about 25 people going home. She thought about Sangan. She always thought about Sangan. She was going to think about Sangan for the rest of her life, and she was finished pretending otherwise. But thinking about Sangan did not have to mean carrying it alone, and it did not have to mean erasing everything else she was in order to punish herself for it. She had learned that in 11 minutes on a Montana ridgeline. "Yes," she said, "a beginning." 1 week after that, she drove back down the mountain road. She had come up 11 days earlier, the same switchbacks, the same limestone drop-offs, the same dense tree cover on the eastern shoulder. She drove it the way she had always driven roads like this, with full attention to the terrain. She did not try to stop herself from reading the ridgelines. She did not argue with the part of her mind that noted the 2 natural ambush positions and the sightline problems in the single-lane vulnerability. She let it work. She let all of it work. In the passenger seat, Daniel was looking at his phone, reading something she hadn't asked about, and he hadn't explained which was a dynamic that was going to need its own adjustment period, and she was ready for that. She was ready for the whole long, difficult, honest work of building something with another person when both people finally knew the truth. Her camera bag was in the back seat, so was the rifle case. She drove, and she breathed, and she let herself be everything she was, all of it. The photographer and the shooter, the wife and the weapon, the woman who had run from her past and the woman who had just stood in it and refused to look away. Phantom had never truly died, and Alyssa Carter had always been real. She was both, and she was whole, and she drove down the mountain toward whatever came next with her eyes open and her hands steady on the wheel. That was not the end of her story. That was the day her story finally began to tell itself true.